Well, welcome to Posterity Podcast, a discussion of unusual subjects that touch the lives of everyday people from a Christian worldview. This is Mike Carmen sitting alongside Jay Carmen, coming to you from cul-de-sacs in two mysteriously undisclosed locations in Ohio and Tennessee via the internet. This is actually part 2 of personal UFO experiences. What story are we starting with today, Jay?
Well, today we're going to start with something that happened to me, or something that I saw in the summer of 1978 as I was traveling around with some friends from the Cincinnati Bible College and Seminary. We were traveling as camp workers and singers and teachers through the summer of 78 and into, well, I guess we didn't really go into the early fall, but in what I remember is about mid-July, maybe late July in, I think, north central Indiana. I tell the story, I call it my campfire UFO story.
Campfire UFO.
Campfire UFO.
All right, well, here we go.
Well, my second encounter, or experience, I guess, was in the summer of 1978. And since we're talking about Cincinnati Bible College and Seminary, Mike and I both graduated from there. I'm a 1982 graduate with a bachelor's degree in Christian ministries, and I've been semi-retired from ministry now for a number of years. When I graduated, it took me 6 years to get through college for medical reasons. I crammed a 4-year degree into 6. So I actually started in 76, graduated in 82. But in the summer of 1978, just after finishing my sophomore year, I had joined a group of students in what was called the Come Alive program, and we were split up into teams. We actually started performing in the spring of the year, but we would sing, travel around to different churches, and my job for the summer of 1978 was I was on a camp team. There were 5 of us, and we spent from the end of May through the very early middle part of August traveling to church camps around the Midwest. So in the summer of 1978, I visited church camps, and we would work there each church camp for a week, and then sometimes we would perform weekends at other churches. But I traveled for that 10-week period during the summer to churches in Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Iowa. I remember being in those different states.
You guys went all the way out to Iowa?
Yeah, we did.
Wow.
Yep. And when I said West Virginia, that's not right. We actually did work at a church in northwestern Pennsylvania, and we performed at a couple of churches in West Virginia, but we didn't work at a church camp there. At least I don't remember working at a church camp there. So in the summer of 1978, probably this is how I remember it, and I've done some research to try to isolate the camp so that I could put some flesh and bones to the memory, and I've had very little success so far. But in the summer of 78, probably what I remember to be the mid to last part of July, I remember it was hot, and I'm pretty sure we were in central or north central Indiana. We had been working at a church camp there for a week. We would come in on Sunday afternoon and stay through usually Saturday morning, and then we'd leave on Saturday morning. And I remember that at the end, and this was pretty typical of all the church camps at the time, every night you had campfire, usually just after dark, the sun just had gone down, and you'd do some singing, and our team was in charge of that. Sometimes one of us would speak, sometimes another person on the volunteer staff at the camp would speak, but they'd have kind of a vesper service every night. And then Friday night was the last campfire. And I remember that this was the Friday night, the final campfire of the week. It had been a very hot week. There was a swimming pool there at that camp, which we made a lot of use of because it was warm. And I don't remember a lot of details. Actually, I don't remember many details about any of the camps that I visited that summer, except the very first one, which was the first time I'd ever done a full week in a church camp. And it was a good experience. It was great. But and overall, the summer was a great experience. But at this particular camp, we'd been there for the week. It was the final campfire. It was probably about 10:30 at night. We would usually start campfire. Like I said, sun had been down for a while, but it was still light about 9:30. in July. And we'd been through the Vespers and the singing, and whoever had spoken had given the devotion that night. After campfire, we would break up into prayer circles, usually at different places on the campgrounds. And I remember this being a pretty good sized camp. And then it was lights out. You'd have to be in the dorm or cabin, depending on the camp week. You'd have to be in by 11 o'clock. And then usually it was lights out shortly after that. So it was about 10:30. The Vesper speaker had just finished speaking, and then the camp director had gotten up, done the final announcements for the week, and the next morning, of course, everybody was going to be packing up to go home. People were just kind of standing up, milling around, getting ready to go back, and the campfire was still burning. And I was sitting on a bench with a friend of mine from the team and some other campers, and we were talking back and forth. And the campfire was maybe, I don't remember if I was on the bench closest to the fire or the second one, but the campfire itself was not more than 15 feet away. Still burning, not high, but still pretty bright. And I remember that if you looked, it was kind of downhill just a bit. So if you looked, because the benches were in like a semicircle, and if you kind of looked down at the fire and then looked up, you could see the outline of the trees. It was real dark, of course. And of course, you got bright light, dark trees, so the wood line beyond us and around us was just pitch black. But then it was a cloudless night. I mean, you could look up and see the stars. And I just happened to glance up just a little bit, and it almost looked like it came out of the right side, out of nowhere, behind the canopy of trees. And that's not that it was behind the trees, but it was just so high up and so far out that you were kind of looking up through a bowl. Uh-huh. And out of my right side came a bright white light. This was pretty steady, and it just shot in a straight line very rapidly, and then stopped, almost dead center in your point of view. It was, again, big enough and bright enough that to me it was probably been a little bit smaller than the end of my finger, if you held your finger out and looked at it. But it was just brilliant bright white light, just stopped dead. Very quick, straight line, zip, and stopped, hung there in the sky for a minute, and then just went straight down. It didn't fall. It descended in a straight line out, of course, it went down beyond the trees, beyond us. And for just the briefest second, I'm just stunned. And I wondered for a minute if I was the only one that saw it, And then I realized that you could have heard a pin drop in the grass. It was just dead silent. And then you heard these kids go, "Did you see that? What was that?"
Oh yeah.
I was not the only one that saw it. And the guy next to me saw it,
When it descended, did it descend behind some trees?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Or okay. So you didn't see it. You didn't see it actually come down to the ground.
Oh no.
Itself.
No.
Okay.
Right, because if you you remember where the fire was out in front of us, it was not burning high, but it was still pretty bright, and because of the brightness of the fire, you could kind of see some of the tree line in the woods beyond the fire, because we were in like an area where there were woods in front of us and a little bit to the sides of us on each side.
Right.
Because they had built this campfire arena area. They had built it kind of they had, moved some trees out and built a pit and then a little amphitheater type thing. So you could see the trees on the other side. You could see the outline of the trees around you. But because it was so bright, most of the trees were dark, except those kind of immediately on the other side, and you could see the lower trunks and things. But if you were looking up, the trees were just dark,
Uh-huh.
But the sky was very bright, and you could see the stars. But you could see the edge line above the fire. And so when this light descended, it descended down the trees, and not like you couldn't see the ground, because you were looking out almost kind of like onto the horizon a bit.
Uh-huh.
It was big enough and bright enough that it seemed to go down not far away, but it was small enough that, it could have been whatever it was, let's say, that if it actually had gone all the way down to the ground, it might not have been more than a couple of miles at most. It was hard to tell.
Yeah.
Or could have been less than that.
Yeah.
I don't think it was extremely far away. But then again, you're looking at the night sky. It's kind of hard to tell distance and size. But this thing was just this fixed, bright white light moving very quick in a straight line, stopped dead, and then went straight down. It was just like if you were watching a cartoon, like the Roadrunner, the Roadrunner hits the brakes. This thing didn't do that. This was no gradual stop. It was stop, hung there for a second or two, and then just went down.
Oh my goodness!
Really, it was kind of mechanical. It was very mechanical.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
And so when I realized, number one, I wasn't the only one that saw it, and number two, everybody else was just as freaked out as I was, and you could hear people going, "Did you see that?" Because nobody, like, if they said, "Do you see that?" and they said, "Oh no, I didn't see anything." "Oh no, me either." So I don't know exactly kind of what. For a few seconds, for a few minutes, not seconds, but for several minutes after that, there were some just kind of milling around, but most were kind of going up the hill to their prayer circles, up behind us, away from the campfire. Uh-huh. Some people were kind of looking around, and my friend and I stayed there for a moment until everybody was kind of away, and then we walked around the campfire and beyond the campfire to the edge of the trees. And you could kind of, because it was still kind of like, I remember it being a little bit downhill. So when we stopped and looked, we were like looking out over some low trees in a wooded area. And then you could see the dark area of the higher trees out in the distance. And we're just looking, just watching to see if this thing was going to pop back up or to see if anything else, nothing else happened. We went back to our cabins, to our prayer circles, and then to our cabins. And I do not remember that any of us talked about it afterward. I do remember however, that the next morning, one of the campers had been so freaked out by that sighting that he had called and asked for someone to take him home. He had actually gone home in the middle of the night.
Oh, wow.
And
yeah, that's right. I remember you telling me about that now.
Yeah. It had kind of freaked him out. I didn't know that until we got up the next morning and went to, we always had a flag raising service and a brief devotional time, and then went on to breakfast. And this was on our way to breakfast. I happened to look around, and I don't remember if somebody brought the name of this boy up, but somebody said, "Oh yeah, he was freaked out last night. He went home." So he was not there the next morning when we got up.
Wow.
He wasn't in my cabin, so I don't remember anything about that, really.
Right.
Now, I will add to this, for those of you that are listening. I started thinking about this story because I thought it would make an interesting little article, and I have been kind of researching this since the fall. And right now, today is July the 15th, July the 15th, 2020.
It's 1920, everybody.
1920. And Mike and I are recording this on a Wednesday morning. So I've been kind of looking into this for the last 6 to 9 months. I reached out to a couple camp directors. It just so happened, the only reason this came to mind was I was going through something last fall, going through some files, and I found a file that our mother had kept on me when I was in college. And she had, I don't remember if she had copies of my grades or anything in there. I don't remember that. That had been a little bit too grade school elementary, But she had kept track of, especially that summer, because I traveled that summer and actually the summer of 79. Traveled for the college and seminary on teams representing the school. The first summer in 78, I traveled on a camp team. And then in 79, I traveled specifically as a recruiter. So
when you saw this was 1978?
This was 1978, July. I remember it being, I'm pretty sure it was late July of 1978. And I ran across this copy of the schedule for the summer that Mom had kept from that summer that I traveled, that first one on the camp team. And she had pictures of the members of those of us who were members of the team, and she had the full schedule for the summer. And so I started going through the church camps from late June through early August, trying to figure out what camp was I at when I had this sighting. And I narrowed it down to 2 in north central and central Indiana, and I contacted the camp directors. Now, the directors actually are deceased. So I contacted the current camp administrators.
Right.
And it just so happens that one of the administrators at one of those camps, and I'm not going to go into details about specifics and where and when, but where and exactly when, but one of the camp directors that I contacted actually had been a student the same week that I was there. He was on a volunteer staff that week.
Ah.
But now keep in mind, I don't know exactly what week it was. So he doesn't remember that. And then I reached out to another couple of individuals who were my age or a little bit younger who were also volunteers that week. And I haven't found yet anyone who remembers who was a camp staff member or a camper in these couple of camps that I've looked into. I did, however, also reach out to my friend who had been on that camp team with me, and he did remember the event. And, for the sake of this podcast, I'm not going to go into names again, but he did remember, and we talked at length about that. And he reached out to a couple of people that he knew, and he could not remember either exactly what camp we were at.
Huh.
So we decided it could have.
But it wasn't Round Lake is in Ohio.
Round Lake's in Ohio, yeah, which is the church camp that typically I worked at when I was in youth work and youth ministry later on in the 80s and early 90s. But in 1978, this had to have been, I'm pretty sure this was a camp in north central or central Indiana. It might have been eastern Illinois, but I don't think so. And then the other possibility is it could have been another camp in southwestern Ohio, but we actually found that camp director, and he said, no, that did not happen here. And my friend and I were both pretty sure that that's not where we were at when it happened. So far, we've not been able to put much into that, and it's in terms of actual evidence. But that's what happened. It was a kind of a weird experience. And it's funny, my friend and I never talked about it really afterward until I reached out here just in the last few months and made contact about that.
Now, didn't you say that that your friend told you that the young boy who went home that night, who was so freaked out by the experience, he made some comments that led you to believe that perhaps his family was involved in the occult?
Yeah, either he or his family or both. Certainly him. He had some experiences, and I did not know this firsthand. My friend shared this and just said that he had way too much sort of information about some things, and it had come up that maybe he had been in contact with people who were experimenting with the occult in some way.
Oh, boy.
And so when he went home,
yeah,
he was freaked out because his words were, they came to get me.
Oh, boy.
That he honestly thought something was happening and they were there to get him somehow. Because a day or two earlier, as a result of being at church camp, he had decided that maybe he needed to give up some of this stuff. And he was talking seriously about becoming a Christian, giving his life to Jesus, and because he had that turn sort of within himself, he felt like maybe there was retribution coming,
blowback. Yeah,
that somebody was coming to get him.
Now, what age group would that have been? Was that for middle schoolers, junior high students?
I'm pretty sure these were, again, we have narrowed it down to, my friend and I have narrowed it down to, these were probably high school kids. However, we think that week included ninth graders, which was not typical. Some high school weeks were, like when I was in high school was 10th, 11th, and 12th. And there was no such thing as middle school. You probably don't remember this because it had changed by the time you hit the high school, but because Mike and I went to the same school system growing up. When I was in high school, there was junior high, 7th, 8th, ninth, and then high school, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And in our school system, there were 2 junior highs and 5 or 6 elementary schools. I think there were 5 that fed the system in that part of eastern Canton, eastern part of Canton. We actually were in Canton Township schools, Canton local schools.
Yeah.
So 5 elementaries, 2 junior highs, and a high school. But now, of course, most schools don't have junior high. They have middle school. And middle school can be grades 6, 7, 8. I've actually talked to some, I think, where middle school was 5, 6, 7, 8. And in most cases, 9th grade is considered high school. But at the time that I was in school, high school started in 10th grade. So I am pretty sure that this was a high school week. I remember these kids being older, except that it seems to me that we had some 9th graders there that week. And in talking with some of the directors that I have talked to, or people I've reached out to, it has come up that, yeah, that has sometimes been the case, where an older, what we call junior high, an older junior high school student couldn't go during junior high week, so sometimes they'd be at high school. Or in some cases, some of these camps were so busy. These would have been big birth years. There were a lot of kids in different schools. And in some cases, the church camps were so full during the summer that they would open up. Like they would take, maybe they had big junior high weeks scheduled, and so they'd take the high school week and they would add 9th grade to that. So that you'd have a 4-year span there that week instead of a 3. So that's how I remember it. I'm reasonably sure that there was nobody there younger than 9th grade. These were older kids.
Right. Huh.
And to be honest, we didn't work many junior high camps. We were, to be part of Come Alive, you were considered a recruiter for the college and seminary, Cincinnati Bible College and Seminary, especially the college. And you didn't typically recruit from the junior high. You recruited from the high school.
Yeah.
So we worked mostly high school weeks, 10th grade and up.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, my second sighting occurred in 1997 in a place called Brown County, Indiana, which is in southern Indiana. And I cannot remember the exact location of the camp we were at. I did an internship at a large church in Indianapolis in the late 1990s, and was rather late in life for me to be an intern, but it was still very beneficial. But anyway, we went on a retreat. It was a retreat for single adults, and we were in Brown County, which is in southern Indiana, and it's just beautiful down there if you've never been there. And unfortunately, I do not remember the location of the camp, but we had been there maybe an hour or so. This was probably on a Friday night, and there were some people congregating down towards a campfire area, and me and another guy unpacked our stuff in our bunk and all of that, and came across the campground and walked down towards I remember it being a pond or a small lake. And unfortunately, I cannot remember his name, but we walked down this path to a pond, which was surrounded by woods, and it was getting dark, and it was sometime in the fall, I think, of 1997. The pond was rather large, and it actually had a small dock you could walk out on. And this dock was right in front of us. And we're just shooting the bull, looking around, and we both happened to see a blue light. It was probably about, I don't know, 10, 20 degrees to our right, come out from our right, out in front of us, and it came above the tree line, and it came towards us, and it kind of came in a downwards trajectory. And it came towards us, and it went out in front of us to our left, and then it made a quick U-turn back around in front of us, and then it headed right off in the direction from which it came. it was it was so bizarre because we both just stood there, and this blue light just kind of comes out from over top of the trees, and it's not like it's way far out into the sky. It's just above the trees, and it comes out from over top of the trees, down in front of us, maybe I don't know, 50 feet or so, 75 feet. And it does a U-turn right in front of us, and then it heads right off into the direction from which it came. And we both, did that. Did you just see that? I wasn't. Please tell me I'm not the only one that saw that. And we both just looked at each other like, "Good grief, what was that?" And so we walked back down this path. I'll never forget this because this really spoke to me a lot about how people receive and think about unusual personal experiences. But we walked back down the path from which we came and headed towards the campfire where all the adults were gathering. And we were both rather amazed by this. And we stopped and we're talking with a few people and we're describing what happened. And another guy who was in this group just stopped and looked at us and said, "Well, what am I supposed to do with that?" I just shrugged my shoulders like, I don't know. I don't know what to do with it either. Like you punk. I don't know what you're supposed to do with it. I guess you could put it on the end of a cigarette and smoke it if you want to do it. I don't know, And it told me that, if people don't have a category for which to place an unusual supernatural or just an unusual experience, right, they just assume, well, I don't know what to do with this, so you might as well have just not told me. Right. And so I learned that early on, that some things you just don't share with people because right, they don't know what to do with it. But right, that was my blue light experience in Southern Indiana. And no, I was not at Kmart.
That's right. That was my next question. Yeah. For those of you that remember the blue light specials at the Kmart stores.
That's right.
Back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Well, those are two UFO experiences that we thought we'd pull out of our files and share with you. Anything else you want to add?
The only thing I can say is, the only thing that Mike and I can probably add to that is, growing up, Dad had been an engineer. He was a quality control engineer and had worked with some different projects, including some things that were had government and military origin. And he wasn't high up within the engineering world or anything like that. But we think partly because of his experience with that and because of the whole, and I think we've alluded to this before when we were talking about Majestic 12, the whole 1950s, early 1950s, which was the years when everybody was seeing unusual lights in the sky and all this was going, and reporting things, and this was in the 50s and 60s. Dad had followed kind of the newspaper accounts, sometimes magazine accounts or book accounts of different things. And so Mike and I were not unfamiliar with the lore surrounding unidentified flying objects, UFOs, or what they now call unidentified aerial phenomenon. And the reason I say that is because sometimes what you observe in the sky is so crazy looking or so behaves in such an irrational manner that you think, well, like your friend, you look at that and go, what am I supposed to do with that? you know? And so we've kind of just quietly listened, observed sometimes. But these were the things that we noticed or saw as younger men. And no, we don't know necessarily what to do with those. I will say this one thing, and this is kind of the closing comment. My friend told me, and this is something he did not, I don't remember him telling me this at the time that this happened, but he said when we reconnected a few months back and we were talking about this, he said, I remember thinking at the time, this is as close to the demonic as I want to be.
That's a good thought.
That is a good thought. And of course, then the one camper left in a bit of a panic because of some things that he had been involved in. And so you know, it had an impact, a negative impact, obviously, on him. It had neither positive nor negative on me. It was just an observation. But how we think about these things determines, to a large degree, our framework for going forward. And of course, my perspective is that of a believing Christian and a creationist. I believe that God created us, and I believe that there are supernatural influences, and that real power, real authority, real truth rests in God and in the Word of God and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So I don't place a lot of credence or anything in some of these things, but I do not discount people who tell me they have seen these things or experienced something unusual, whether it's whatever, because I have also seen something unusual. So,
Yeah.
For our listeners, no, you're not crazy. Neither am I. Whoa, No.
And I think one of the things that we'll eventually talk about is how we look at the broad spectrum of UFO and abduction experiences from a biblical worldview.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I have concluded is that obviously the Bible doesn't have to speak to every particular kind of experience that believers and unbelievers have, but it can give us principles to develop an interpretive framework by which we can judge our experiences to determine whether they're of benefit to us or not, maybe even be meant to do us harm in terms of even just developing an anti-biblical worldview. Right. But we'll get into that sort of thing later. But I think what you said is just well said.
So do we leave any kind of contact information for people? maybe not. We are not good interpreters, or we're not. This is not a UFO call-in show or anything like that.
Yeah.
But this does.
I would, if you don't mind me throwing in, since you said that, I would always recommend to Christians and non-Christians alike a book by Dr. Neil Anderson called The Bondage Breaker. And part of that book deals with helping believers deal with very disturbing or even demonic experiences. And for unbelievers, it actually gives them a road to finding freedom in Jesus Christ and casting off the oppression of such evil entities in your life. So I would wholeheartedly recommend The Bondage Breaker by Dr. Neil Anderson. So
yeah, it is. I've read that as well. It's a good sort. It makes you think, and then reconsider, your perspective on life.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's it.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it today.
All right, everybody. Well,
cue the closing music.
Cue Jackie Gleason. That's all for this edition of the Posterity Podcast, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Here's Ray Carmen with Hamana Hamana taking us out. Bye, everybody.
Bye.